5 times. 5 times he touched her with a reverence that made her forget she'd ever been afraid. 5 times she whispered his name in the darkness like a confession, like a plea she didn't know she was making. But when the morning light broke through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private suite and he saw the crimson stain on the Egyptian cotton sheets, Marco's entire world shifted on its axis. His hands trembled. The man who commanded boardrooms and controlled millions stood frozen, because in that moment he understood what she had given him went far beyond her body. If you want to discover how a spilled wine glass at a charity gala transformed 2 people from different universes into something neither could have predicted, subscribe to the channel now. Leave a like if you still believe that real love can bloom in the most unexpected places. And tell me in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Your presence here means everything. The December wind howled against the windows of the St. Regis Hotel ballroom, rattling the crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen waterfalls above New York's elite. Inside, the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala was in full swing, a sea of black tuxedos and jewel-toned evening gowns swirling across marble floors that reflected the golden light like liquid amber. The air was thick with expensive perfume, champagne, and the particular brand of laughter that comes from people who have never known what it means to struggle. Marco Valentini stood near the bar, a glass of Macallan in his hand that he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. At 42, he was the kind of man who made people nervous just by existing in the same room. Not because he was cruel, but because of the sheer intensity he carried like a second skin. His dark eyes, almost black in certain light, swept across the crowd with the practiced disinterest of someone who had attended 1,000 events exactly like this one. The Tom Ford tuxedo he wore was custom-tailored to perfection, but it might as well have been armor for all the warmth it conveyed. He was Marco Valentini, the CEO who had taken his family's struggling import business and transformed it into a global luxury empire. Hotels, restaurants, vineyards across 3 continents. His name appeared in Forbes, in Bloomberg, whispered with equal parts admiration and fear in boardrooms from Manhattan to Milan. But standing there among people who called themselves his peers, he felt nothing but a vast, aching emptiness that no amount of success could fill. Then she appeared. The ballroom doors opened, and a gust of cold air brought with it a woman who looked like she'd stumbled into the wrong universe. Elena Santos entered the gala 15 minutes late, her second-hand evening gown a deep emerald green that she'd found at a consignment shop in Queens. The dress fit her curves perfectly, clinging to her body in ways that made several heads turn. But there was something in the way she moved, a mixture of determination and barely concealed discomfort that set her apart from every other woman in the room. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple twist, a few rebellious curls escaping to frame her face. No diamonds, no designer shoes, just a woman who clearly didn't belong, but was here anyway. Elena's hands clutched a small black purse that contained exactly 3 things: her hospital ID badge, $27, and a folded piece of paper with the name of the hospital administrator she was supposed to meet tonight. She was a pediatric nurse at Mount Sinai, working double shifts to support her younger sister through college, and she had exactly one goal for this evening: convince someone, anyone, to increase the hospital's funding for the children's cancer ward. She didn't care about the champagne or the networking. She cared about the 7-year-old girl in room 304 who needed a medication the insurance wouldn't cover. Marco noticed her immediately. It was impossible not to. She moved through the crowd like a salmon swimming upstream, apologizing when she bumped into people, her eyes scanning the room with an intensity that had nothing to do with social climbing and everything to do with purpose. When a waiter passed with a tray of champagne flutes, she took one, not because she wanted it, but because her hands needed something to hold. That's when it happened. A prominent donor, already 3 drinks past appropriate, turned too quickly while gesturing broadly about his latest yacht purchase. His elbow connected with Elena's arm just as she was raising the glass to her lips. The champagne arced through the air in what seemed like slow motion, a perfect golden cascade that splashed directly across the front of Marco Valentini's pristine white dress shirt. The ballroom seemed to pause. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the orchestra faltered for half a beat. Elena's face went from olive to ash in less than a second. She stood frozen, the now empty champagne flute still in her hand, staring at the spreading wet stain across the chest of the most powerful man in the room. Marco looked down at his ruined shirt, then up at her. Their eyes met for the first time, and something passed between them that neither could name. It wasn't attraction. Not yet. It was recognition. The kind of soul-deep acknowledgement that happens when two people who have been sleepwalking through their lives suddenly wake up at exactly the same moment. "I am so sorry," Elena breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. She grabbed napkins from a nearby table, stepping closer without thinking, her hands moving to blot the champagne from his shirt before she realized what she was doing. Her fingers pressed against his chest, and through the wet fabric she could feel the heat of his skin, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Marco stood perfectly still. He should have been angry. He should have made some cutting remark and walked away. But instead, he found himself watching the way her eyebrows drew together in genuine distress, the way she bit her bottom lip in concentration, the way her scent, something clean and simple like soap and rain, cut through all the heavy perfumes around them. "It's fine," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. She looked up at him, really looked at him, and he saw intelligence in those brown eyes, warmth, and something else. A bone-deep exhaustion that he recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. "It's not fine," she insisted, still trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. "This shirt probably costs more than I make in a month, and I wasn't paying attention. I was looking for someone. And she was rambling, and Marco found it unexpectedly charming. "Who were you looking for?" he asked. Elena blinked, surprised that he was engaging rather than dismissing her. "Dr. Patterson. He's on the hospital board. I'm a nurse at Mount Sinai, pediatric oncology, and I need to talk to him about funding for—" She stopped, realizing she was explaining her entire mission to a stranger. "You know what? You don't care about this. I'm so sorry about your shirt. If you send me the dry cleaning bill, I don't care about the shirt," Marco interrupted, and he meant it. Something about her directness, her complete lack of artifice in a room full of people performing elaborate social dances, was like oxygen after years of breathing stale air. "Tell me about the funding." Elena stared at him as if he'd just spoken in ancient Greek. What? "The funding you need. Tell me." For the next 10 minutes, standing there with champagne drying on his shirt, Marco Valentini listened as Elena Santos explained with passionate precision exactly what was wrong with the children's cancer ward, what medications were needed, which equipment was outdated, how many families were going bankrupt trying to save their children. She didn't know who he was. She talked to him like he was just another person, and he couldn't remember the last time that had happened. When she finally stopped, breathless and slightly embarrassed by her own intensity, Marco did something that surprised them both. He smiled. Not the practiced corporate smile he wore like a mask, but a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. Elena looked at his hand like it might bite her. "Where?" "Somewhere we can talk properly. And where I can change my shirt." She should have said no. Every instinct screamed that you don't go off with strange men at galas, no matter how expensive their ruined shirts are. But there was something in his eyes, a loneliness that echoed her own, a sincerity that cut through her caution. She took his hand, His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and the touch sent an electric current up her arm that made her breath catch. He led her through the crowd, which parted for him automatically, and she realized with growing horror that people were staring, not at her, at him, like he was someone important. They took an elevator up to the penthouse level. Elena's heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it. The doors opened directly into a suite that was larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, the city spreading out below them like a carpet of stars. "Make yourself comfortable," Marco said, gesturing to a leather sofa that probably cost more than her car. "I'll just be a moment." He disappeared into what she assumed was the bedroom, and Elena stood frozen in the middle of the suite, afraid to touch anything. The space was decorated with minimalist elegance, all clean lines and muted colors, art on the walls that she suspected was original and priceless. She walked to the windows, pressing her fingertips against the cold glass, looking out at the city where she'd lived her whole life, but never seen from this height. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Marco's voice came from behind her. She turned, and her breath caught again. He'd changed into a fresh white shirt, still unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were surprisingly muscular for a man who presumably spent his days behind a desk. Without the armor of the complete tuxedo, he looked younger, more approachable, devastatingly attractive in a way that made her mouth go dry. "It's overwhelming," she admitted, because lying seemed impossible in this space. Marco moved to stand beside her at the window, maintaining a careful distance, and they stood in silence for a moment. Two people from completely different worlds, momentarily occupying the same space. "Tell me about yourself," he said finally. "Not about the hospital. About you. Why do you care?" The question came out more defensive than she intended. He turned to look at her, really look at her, with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced. Because in a room full of people performing the same tired social rituals, you were real. You were there for a purpose that had nothing to do with being seen or making connections. And when you looked at me, you didn't see. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Whatever it is people usually see. "What do people usually see?" Elena asked softly. "A bank account, a connection, an opportunity." His voice carried a bitterness that made her heart ache. "And what do you see when you look at me?" she challenged. Marco's lips curved into a small smile. A woman who works herself to exhaustion taking care of other people's children. Who wears a second-hand dress to a gala because she'd rather spend the money on her sister's education. Who has a small scar above her left eyebrow. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and traced the tiny white line with his fingertip, from what I'm guessing was a childhood accident. A woman who is so focused on everyone else's needs that she's forgotten she has her own. Elena's eyes widened. "How did I pay attention?" he said simply. His hand was still near her face, and she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The city sprawled below them, millions of people living their lives, but in that suite, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. "I should go," Elena whispered, but she didn't move. "Should you?" Marco asked, his voice dropping lower. "Yes. Why?" "Because I don't know who you are. Because this is," she gestured around the suite, "at the impossible luxury, at the distance between their lives. This isn't my world. Because you're just a man," Marco finished, standing in front of a woman who makes him feel something he thought he'd lost the capacity to feel. "What's that?" "Hope." The word hung between them, simple and devastating. Elena felt tears prick her eyes and didn't know why. Maybe because she was so tired. Tired of being strong, of holding everything together, of pretending she didn't need anyone. "I'm Elena," she said. offering the most basic truth she had. "Marco," he replied, and the way he said it, like it was a gift, made something in her chest crack open. They talked for hours. Marco ordered food from the hotel's restaurant, and they sat on the floor by the windows, eating like college students at a picnic, the formal gala forgotten below them. Elena learned that he'd grown up in Brooklyn, that his father had been a mechanic who dreamed of something bigger, that he'd built his empire from nothing, and now didn't know what it was for. Marco learned that she'd raised her sister since their parents died in a car accident 10 years ago, that she'd given up a scholarship to nursing school in California to stay in New York, that she read poetry when she couldn't sleep and volunteered at a soup kitchen every Sunday. The conversation flowed like they'd known each other for years, jumping from childhood memories to philosophical debates about the meaning of success, from favorite books to deepest fears. Elena found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in months, and Marco discovered that he wanted to tell her things he'd never told anyone. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said as the clock approached midnight. "Anything. Why did you bring me up here?" "Really?" Marco was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers. "Because when you spilled that champagne on me, and you looked at me with such genuine horror, not because of who I am, but because you'd inconvenienced another human being, I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had seen me as just a person. And he paused, vulnerability flickering across his face. I didn't want to let that feeling go." Elena's heart was racing. She should leave. She should thank him for his time and go back to her real life. Instead, she heard herself say, "I don't want to let it go either." The air in the suite changed, became charged with something neither of them could name, but both could feel. Marco shifted slightly closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "Elena." He said her name like a question, like a prayer. "Yes?" "I want to kiss you, but I need you to tell me if that's..." "Yes," she interrupted, surprising herself with her own certainty. Marco's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with a gentleness that made her eyes flutter closed. When his lips finally met hers, it was soft, tentative, a question rather than a demand. Elena had been kissed before, fumbling encounters with boys in college, a brief relationship with a resident that had fizzled when their schedules never aligned. But this was different. This was a kiss that felt like coming home and stepping into unknown territory all at once. She made a small sound in the back of her throat, and Marco responded by deepening the kiss, his other hand sliding into her hair, scattering the pins that held it up until her curls tumbled free around her shoulders. Her hands found his chest, feeling his heart pounding as hard as her own, and she gripped the fabric of his shirt like it was an anchor in a storm. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Just for a little while longer. We can just talk. Or watch the city. Or..." "Okay," Elena breathed, because leaving felt impossible. They moved to the sofa, and somehow she ended up tucked against his side, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting in the hollow of his shoulder like it was made to fit there. They watched the city lights blur and refocus through the windows, and talked about nothing and everything, the conversation flowing and ebbing like a tide. Elena told him about the little girl in room 304, about how she sang Disney songs during her chemo treatments, about how her parents worked 3 jobs between them and still couldn't afford the experimental treatment that might save her life. Marco listened with an intensity that made her feel like every word mattered, and when she finished, he simply said, "Give me her name. I'll take care of it." What? No. I wasn't asking for— I know you weren't, Marco interrupted gently. That's why I want to do it. Tomorrow, I'll have my foundation contact the hospital. Anonymous donation. They'll never know it came from me. Alana pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. Why would you do that? Because you care. And because I can. And because— he wiped her tears with his thumbs, cradling her face in his hands. Because I want to live in a world where people like you don't have to beg for the resources to save children's lives. She kissed him then, hard and desperate, pouring all her gratitude and wonder and the strange, terrifying feeling growing in her chest into that kiss. Marco responded with equal intensity, pulling her closer until she was practically in his lap, his hands tangling in her hair, her curves pressed against the hard planes of his body. Elena, he groaned against her mouth. We should slow down. Why? She challenged, pulling back just enough to look at him. Because I don't want to take advantage. Because this is moving fast. Because you're trying to be honorable, she finished, a small smile playing at her lips. Yes. What if I don't want you to be honorable? Marco's eyes darkened, and she felt him tense beneath her. You don't know what you're saying. I'm 28 years old, Marco. I know exactly what I'm saying. I spend every day taking care of other people, being responsible, being the strong one. Just for tonight, can I be something else? Can I be what? He asked hoarsely. Yours, she whispered. Something broke in Marco then, some last thread of restraint. He kissed her like a man drowning, like she was air and water and everything he needed to survive. His hands explored the curves of her body through the emerald dress, and she arched into his touch, making sounds she'd never made before. Are you sure? He asked, even as his lips trailed down her neck, finding the sensitive spot below her ear that made her gasp. Yes, she breathed. But Marco, yes? I need to tell you something. She pulled back, her cheeks flushed, eyes bright. I haven't. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by something fierce and possessive that made her stomach flutter. Never? Never, she confirmed, holding his gaze. I was always too busy, too focused on other things, and I never found anyone who made me want to. Until you. Marco closed his eyes, his jaw clenching like he was in pain. Elena, that makes this. We should wait. You should think about this. I'm not. You're not what? I'm not a good man, he said roughly. I've done things to build my empire that I'm not proud of. I've hurt people, not physically, but in business. I'm older than you. I'm cynical. You're the first person in years who has made me feel like I matter, Elena interrupted. Not as a nurse, not as a sister, not as someone useful. Just as me. That's what you are. She took his hand and placed it over her racing heart. I want this. I want you. Tonight. I can't promise tomorrow, and I'm not asking you to. But tonight, can we just be? Marco finished softly. Yes. He stood, lifting her effortlessly in his arms, and she wrapped her legs around his waist with a small laugh of surprise. Then, let me do this right, he said, carrying her toward the bedroom. Let me make this perfect for you. The bedroom was dimly lit, soft light from the city filtering through sheer curtains that made everything feel dreamlike. Marco set her down gently beside the massive bed, his hand steady despite the desire she could see burning in his eyes. He took his time, fingers finding the zipper of her dress with a gentleness that made her shiver. Tell me if you want to stop, he murmured against her ear. At any point, I need to hear you say it. I will, Elena promised, though stopping felt like the last thing she would ever want. The dress pooled at her feet, and she stood before him in simple cotton undergarments, that hadn't been chosen for seduction, but the way Marco looked at her made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. His eyes roamed over her curves with an appreciation that was almost reverent. "Perfect," he breathed. "You are absolutely perfect." She reached for his shirt, fingers fumbling with the buttons in her nervousness. Marco covered her hands with his, stilling them. "We have all night," he said softly. "There's no rush. I want to learn every inch of you. I want to know what makes you sigh, what makes you laugh, what makes you forget your own name." The promise in his words made heat pool low in her belly. Together they removed his shirt, and Elena's breath caught at the sight of him. He was beautiful in a way that seemed unfair, all lean muscle and smooth skin, a small scar on his ribs that she traced with wondering fingers. "Childhood accident," he explained with a small smile. "Fell off my bike trying to impress a girl." "Did it work?" Elena asked, distracted by the way his muscles jumped under her touch. "No. But maybe I was just waiting for the right woman to impress." He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. They fell onto the bed together, a tangle of limbs and whispered words. Marco took his time, exploring her body with hands and lips and tongue, learning what made her gasp, what made her arch, what made her call his name. When he touched her intimately for the first time, Elena thought she might shatter from the intensity of sensation. "Okay?" he asked, watching her face carefully. "More than okay," she managed, her voice breaking. Marco worked her body like an instrument, building pleasure in layers until she was trembling, on the edge of something she'd never experienced. When the first climax hit, she cried out his name, her hands fisting in the sheets, her body arching off the bed. He held her through it, murmuring praise in Italian that she didn't understand but felt in her bones. "Beautiful," he said, kissing her slowly as the aftershocks rolled through her. "So beautiful. Are you still sure?" "Yes," she said firmly. "But Marco, please, go slow." "Always," he promised. He took his time preparing her, using his fingers with gentle patience, watching her face for any sign of discomfort. When he finally positioned himself above her, Elena felt a moment of fear, not of him, but of the vulnerability, of giving this part of herself that she could never take back. "Look at me," Marco commanded softly. She did, meeting his dark eyes, seeing her own desire reflected there along with something deeper, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Stay with me," he said, beginning to press forward slowly, so slowly. "Breathe, Kara. Just breathe." There was pressure, then a sharp sting that made her wince. Marco froze immediately. "Do you want me to stop?" "No," Elena gasped. "Just give me a second." He held perfectly still, kissing her face, her neck, whispering endearments in both English and Italian until she relaxed around him. Then, inch by careful inch, he filled her completely. The sensation was overwhelming, foreign, but not painful. Just intense, so intense she could barely breathe. "Okay?" he asked through gritted teeth, and she could see the strain in his face, the effort it was costing him to hold still. "Move," she whispered. "Please, Marco, I need—" He did, establishing a slow, careful rhythm that gradually built into something more. Elena had expected this to be awkward, fumbling, maybe even disappointing like her friends had sometimes described their first times. But this was none of those things. This was Marco's eyes locked on hers, seeing straight through to her soul. This was the way he said her name, like a benediction. This was the feeling of being cherished, protected, desired, and seen all at once. The second climax built slowly, a wave gathering strength. When it finally broke over her, She did forget her own name. Forgot everything except the feeling of Marco inside her, around her, everywhere. "Elena," he groaned, and she felt him follow her over the edge, his body shuddering against hers. They collapsed together, breathing hard, skin slicked with sweat. Marco carefully withdrew and immediately pulled her against his chest, his hand stroking her hair with infinite tenderness. "Are you okay?" he asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice. "Did I hurt you?" "No," Elena said honestly, tears streaming down her face, though she wasn't sad. "It was perfect. You were perfect." Marco tilted her face up to his, wiping her tears. "Why are you crying?" "Because I didn't know it could be like that. Because you made me feel," she struggled for words, "like I matter, like I'm precious, like I'm more than just what I do for other people." "You are," he said fiercely. "You're extraordinary, Elena Santos. You're brilliant and compassionate and brave, and he stopped, looking almost scared. "What?" she pressed. "I don't know what this is," he admitted, "this feeling, but it terrifies me." Elena kissed him softly. "Me too." They made love twice more that night, each time different. The second time was slower, exploratory, with Marco teaching her body things she'd never known it could feel. The third time, as dawn began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, was urgent, almost desperate, as if they both sensed the sun would bring reality crashing back. When they finally lay exhausted, wrapped in sheets that smelled of their mingled scent, Marco traced patterns on her bare shoulder and asked, "What happens now?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I have a shift at noon. You probably have meetings, boardrooms to dominate, empires to expand. I'd cancel all of it to spend the day with you," Marco said, and she believed him. "You can't build a relationship on stolen moments in a hotel suite," Elena said practically, even as her heart cracked at the words. "Maybe not," Marco agreed. "But we can try." He sat up, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Have dinner with me. Tonight. Tomorrow. Every night if you'll let me. Let me take you to that Italian place in the village you mentioned. Let me meet your sister. Let me be part of your real life, not just this fantasy." "Marco, we're from completely different worlds." "So what?" he challenged. "You think I care about that? You think any of this," he gestured at the luxury surrounding them, "means anything compared to the way you make me feel? I've spent 20 years building an empire, and it's been empty. Every success, every acquisition, it's all been hollow because I had no one to share it with. And then you spilled champagne on me, and suddenly everything made sense." Elena wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe. "What about when you get bored? When you realize I can't navigate your world, that I don't know which fork to use at fancy dinners, that I work night shifts and come home smelling like hospital disinfectant?" Marco cupped her face in his hands. "Then I'll learn to love the smell of hospital disinfectant. I'll teach you about forks, though honestly, who cares? I'll adjust my schedule to yours. Elena, I'm not asking you to fit into my world. I'm asking if we can build a new one together." The vulnerability in his eyes undid her. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we can try." The smile that broke across his face was incandescent. He kissed her breathless, then jumped out of bed with an energy that seemed impossible given how little they'd slept. "Where are you going?" Elena laughed, watching him stride naked across the room, without an ounce of self-consciousness. "I'm ordering breakfast. Real breakfast. And then I'm driving you home, and tonight I'm picking you up at 7 for dinner. Wear something comfortable. I want to take you somewhere that matters." 3 weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and deepening connection. Marco did exactly what he'd promised. He learned her schedule, and adjusted his life around it. He showed up at the hospital after her late shifts with coffee, made exactly how she liked it. He met her sister Maya, a precocious 22-year-old college senior, who interrogated him like a detective before grudgingly admitting he seemed okay, I guess. They had dinner at tiny hole-in-the-wall restaurants in Queens, where the food was incredible and nobody recognized Marco Valentini, billionaire CEO. He taught her about wine at his vineyard upstate, and she taught him how to salsa dance in her tiny apartment, laughing when he stepped on her toes. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. He learned that she was terrified of birds, that she secretly wrote poetry in a journal she'd never shown anyone, that her favorite sound in the world was children laughing. She learned that he played piano when he couldn't sleep, that he'd wanted to be an architect before business consumed his life, that his biggest regret was never reconciling with his father before he died. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments when the differences in their worlds created friction. The first time Elena saw a gossip blog photo of herself labeled Mystery Woman with Valentini air, she nearly had a panic attack. The first time she attended one of his business dinners and couldn't follow the conversation about hedge funds and market shares, she excused herself to cry in the bathroom. Marco found her, of course. He always found her. "Talk to me," he said gently, locking the bathroom door behind him. "I don't belong in your world," Elena said, mascara running down her face. "They all know it. That woman, the one in the red dress, she asked me what I did, and when I said I was a nurse, she actually laughed. Like it was cute, that I had a little job." Marco's jaw clenched. She's an entitled socialite who has never worked a day in her life, and whose biggest accomplishment is marrying rich. You save children's lives. You are worth 100 of her. But in your world, my world is wherever you are, Marco interrupted fiercely. "I don't care about these people. I never have. I'm only here because business requires it. But you," he tilted her face up to his, "you I choose every single day. If you're uncomfortable at these events, we won't go. If people make you feel less than, I'll cut them out of my life without a second thought. Tell me what you need." "I need you to be patient with me," Elena whispered. "I need time to find my footing. And I need you to understand that I'm scared. Scared that you'll wake up one day and realize you could have anyone in the world, and you chose a nurse from Queens who can't tell Prada from Target." "I chose the woman who makes me want to be better," Marco said. "I chose the woman who cares more about a sick child than about being photographed. I chose you, Elena, not your job, not your background. You, and I will choose you every single day for as long as you'll let me." That night, back in Marco's penthouse, he asked the question that had been burning in his mind since that first morning. "Why me?" he asked as they lay tangled together on his sofa, the city lights twinkling below them. "What do you mean?" Elena murmured, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his chest. "Why did you trust me that night? You didn't know who I was. You could have left after we talked. But you stayed. You gave me something precious, something you'd kept for 28 years. Why?" Elena was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Finally, she said, "Because I saw you. Not Marco Valentini, the CEO. Just Marco. A man who was as lonely as I was. A man who listened when I talked about dying children and didn't look away. A man who looked at me like I was the only person in the room, in the world." She shifted to look at him. "And because when you touched me, it felt right. Like my body recognized yours before my brain could catch up. Does that sound crazy?" "No," Marco said roughly. "Because I felt it too, like I'd been waiting my whole life without knowing what I was waiting for. And then, there you were." He kissed her deeply, and soon they were making love again, the connection between them growing stronger with each touch, each whispered word. each shared breath. Afterward, as Alina dozed against his chest, Marco stared at the ceiling and faced a truth he'd been avoiding. He was falling in love with her. No, that wasn't accurate. He had already fallen. Completely, irrevocably, terrifyingly in love with a woman who challenged him, who made him laugh, who saw through all his defenses to the man underneath. And that meant telling her the truth about who he was. Not just the CEO, but the whole complicated mess of his life. He'd been protecting her from it, keeping her separate from the sharks who circled his world. But if this was going to be real, if they were going to build something lasting, she deserved to know everything. The next morning, Marco woke her with coffee and a serious expression. "We need to talk." Elena sat up, pulling the sheet around her, fear flickering in her eyes. "That sounds ominous." "Not bad," Marco assured her quickly. "At least I hope not. But there are things about my life, about who I am and what I do, that you need to know. If we're going to really do this, you deserve the full picture." Over the next hour, he told her everything. About the ruthless business decisions he'd made, companies he'd absorbed, competitors he'd crushed. About the media attention that would only intensify if their relationship became public. About the family drama, the cousins who resented his success, the board members who questioned every decision. About the loneliness of being at the top, the impossibility of knowing who wanted him versus who wanted his money and influence. Elena listened without interrupting, her face impossible to read. When he finally finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Are you having second thoughts?" Marco asked, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. "No," Alana said slowly. "But I need you to understand something too. I can handle the business world, the publicity, even the family drama. What I can't handle is dishonesty. If we do this, really do this, I need you to promise me that you'll always tell me the truth. Even when it's hard. Even when you think you're protecting me." "I promise," Marco said immediately. "And I need one more thing," Elena continued. "I need you to meet my family. Not just Maya, my whole family. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins. The Santos Sunday dinner where everyone talks over each other and my Tarosa will ask when we're getting married and my Uncle Carlos will probably threaten you. If you can survive that, maybe we have a chance." Marco smiled. "When?" "This Sunday, 2 o'clock. Queens." "And Marco? Yes, they're going to judge you. Not because of your money, but because they love me and they're going to want to make sure you're good enough. I'm not sure I am," Marco admitted, "but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be." That Sunday, Marco Valentini, billionaire CEO, drove to Queens in his deliberately understated car, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt, carrying flowers for Elena's aunt and expensive wine that he hoped wouldn't seem like he was showing off. The Santos family lived in a modest 2-story house that had been in the family for 3 generations. The moment Marco walked in, he was engulfed by noise, warmth, and the overwhelming smell of incredible food. There were at least 20 people crammed into the living room and kitchen, all talking simultaneously in a mixture of English and Spanish. Elena appeared at his side, taking his hand. "Too late to run," she teased. "Wouldn't dream of it," Marco replied, though his heart was pounding harder than it did in the most intense board meetings. Elena's Tarosa, a formidable woman in her 60s, looked him up and down with sharp eyes. "So you're the rich man dating our Elena. I'm the lucky man dating your Elena," Marco corrected respectfully. Something flickered in Rosa's eyes. Approval. "Maybe. We'll see about lucky. Carlos, come meet this boy." Uncle Carlos was a construction worker with hands like concrete blocks and a stare that could strip paint. He shook Marco's hand with enough force to test his grip strength. "You hurt her. Money won't protect you. Understand?" "I would never hurt her," Marco said, meeting his eyes directly. "And if I did, I wouldn't hide behind money or anything else. I deserve whatever you did to me." Carlos studied him for a long moment, then grunted. "We'll see." Lunch was chaos. 20 people talking, laughing, arguing, passing dishes, telling stories. Marco sat between Elena and her sister Maya, trying to follow conversations that jumped between topics and languages. Elena's cousin Miguel interrogated him about his business. Her aunt questioned his intentions. Her younger cousins asked if he had a swimming pool. But it was Elena's grandmother, Abuela Carmen, who was the real test. The tiny, ancient woman sat at the head of the table, watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. After the meal, she crooked her finger at Marco. "Walk with me." They went to the small garden behind the house, where roses grew in wild profusion. Abuela Carmen moved slowly, leaning on a cane, and Marco adjusted his pace to match hers. "My Elena," she began in heavily accented English, "she has a good heart. Too good sometimes. She takes care of everyone, forgets to take care of herself." "I know," Marco said softly. "You love her?" The question was direct, no room for deflection. "Yes, more than I knew it was possible to love someone. Love is easy," Abuela Carmen said. "Staying is hard. When the excitement fades, when real life happens, when she gets sick or loses her job, or when the world tries to tear you apart, will you stay?" Marco thought about his parents, about his father who had worked himself to death, about his mother who had loved a ghost of a man who was never home. He thought about all the relationships he'd seen crumble under the weight of his world. "I can't promise I'll be perfect," he said honestly. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes. But I can promise that I will stay. I will choose her every single day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Abuela Carmen stopped walking and looked up at him. "She told me you were there. At the hospital, when she had to work the night her sister had surgery. You sat in the waiting room for 8 hours even though you had meetings. You brought her coffee and food, and you didn't complain once." Marco remembered that night 3 weeks ago, when Maya had needed an emergency appendectomy and Elena had been beside herself with worry. He'd canceled everything and just been there. "She needed me," he said simply. "Yes," Abuela Carmen agreed. "And you came. That is love. Not flowers and fancy dinners, being there when you're needed." She patted his hand with her small, weathered one. "You are good for her. I see it in her eyes. She smiles now. Real smiles. Not the ones she uses to pretend she's okay. You may keep her." Marco felt something tight in his chest loosen. "Thank you, but," Abuela Carmen added, her voice stern, "you make her cry for bad reasons. You disrespect her. You make her feel small. And this family, we will make your life very difficult. Money or no money. I would expect nothing less," Marco said. "And I would deserve it." Back inside, Elena found him in the kitchen, helping her aunt with dishes. "You're doing dishes?" she asked, surprised. "Your aunt asked for help," Marco said, elbow deep in soapy water. "I have hands." Rosa caught Alana's eye and nodded approvingly. Later, as they drove back to Manhattan, Alana was quiet. "That was intense," Marco said. "Your family is overwhelming, loud, intrusive?" Alana supplied. "Wonderful," Marco finished. "They love you fiercely. Your abuela threatened me very eloquently." Alana laughed. "She likes you. If she didn't, she would have just ignored you. The threat means you passed. I want that," Marco said suddenly. "What?" "That kind of family. That connection." Growing up, dinners were silent affairs with my father reading the newspaper and my mother pretending everything was fine. I built an empire, but I built it alone. And watching your family today, seeing how they show up for each other, how they laugh and argue and love without reservation, I realized that's what I've been missing. He took her hand. I want to build that with you. Someday. Not tomorrow, not next week, but someday. A family. A home full of noise and life. Children who grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I want that too. But Marco, that's a long way off. We've only been together a few weeks. I know, Marco said. I'm not asking you to decide anything now. I'm just telling you where my heart is, where it's going. So you know. That night, they made love with a new depth of emotion, a new understanding of what they were building together, and afterward, as they lay in the dark, Marco whispered the words he'd been holding back. I love you, Elena Santos. I'm in love with you. Completely, absolutely, terrifyingly in love with you. Elena's breath caught. I love you too, she whispered back. I think I started falling that first night, and I haven't stopped. They held each other in the darkness. Two people from different worlds who had found something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed. 2 months later, Marco invited Elena to spend a weekend at his family's estate in the Hamptons. It's time you saw where I come from, he said. The full picture. The estate was massive, a sprawling property with ocean views and more rooms than one family could ever need. Elena walked through it feeling overwhelmed by the sheer excess. This is where you grew up? This is where I existed, Marco corrected. I didn't really grow up until I met you. They spent the weekend walking on the beach, talking about their future. Marco showed her the room that had been his as a child, filled with architecture books and building models. This was the dream, he said, picking up a detailed model of a bridge. Building things that mattered, structures that would last. Then, my father had a heart attack when I was 22, and suddenly I was running the business, and the dream got buried under spreadsheets and board meetings. It's not too late, Elena said. What if you started designing again? Not as your job, but as something just for you. I'd like that, Marco said thoughtfully. On the last night, they had dinner on the terrace overlooking the ocean. Marco had arranged for a private chef, candles, the full romantic setup. As they finished dessert, he took her hand. Elena, I know we've only been together for a few months. I know by conventional standards, it's too soon. But I've lived enough life to know when something is right. When someone is right. He slid off his chair and onto one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Elena's hands flew to her mouth. I'm not asking you to marry me, Marco said quickly, seeing the panic in her eyes. Not yet. Not until you're ready. But I want you to have this. He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant promise ring. This is a promise that I'm in this, that I'm not going anywhere, that every day I wake up and choose you. When you're ready, if you're ready, I'll ask you properly. But until then, I just want you to know that my future, whatever it looks like, I want you in it. Elena was crying, nodding, holding out her shaking hand. Marco slid the ring onto her right hand, then stood and pulled her into his arms. I love you, she said against his chest. I love you so much it scares me. Me too, Marco admitted. Loving someone this much, needing someone this much, it's terrifying. But it's also the best thing I've ever felt. That night, they made love under the stars on the terrace. The sound of the waves crashing below them, the salt air on their skin. It felt like a new beginning, a promise being made and received. The next 6 months tested them in ways neither expected. Elena's hospital went through budget cuts, and she was working 70-hour weeks trying to compensate for staff shortages. Marco was navigating a hostile takeover attempt from a rival company. Their time together shrank to stolen moments, exhausted conversations at midnight, text messages when they were too tired to call. There were arguments. About time, about priorities, about the fundamental differences in their lives. Elena felt guilty every time Marco's driver picked her up from the hospital while her co-workers took the subway. Marco felt helpless watching her work herself to exhaustion while he had the resources to fix everything, but couldn't because she refused to accept money. "I need to do this myself," Elena insisted after a particularly heated argument about a student loan payment she'd missed. "I can't let you just solve all my problems with your checkbook." "I'm not trying to solve your problems," Marco shot back. "I'm trying to help the woman I love." "Why is that so wrong?" "Because it changes the dynamic," Elena said, tears streaming down her face. "Because I need to know I can survive without you. Not because I want to, but because I need to know I'm not with you because you make life easier. I need to know I'm with you because I choose you, not because I need you." Marco was quiet for a long moment. "Is that what you think? That I think you're with me for my money?" "No," Elena said miserably. "But I think other people think that. And sometimes, late at night when I'm exhausted and everything is hard, I worry that you think that too." Marco crossed to her, taking her face in his hands. "Listen to me. The woman I fell in love with spilled champagne on me and then lectured me about pediatric cancer funding. The woman I fell in love with works double shifts and still finds time to volunteer at a soup kitchen. The woman I fell in love with makes me want to be better, do better, live better. Not because of what I can give her, but because of what she gives me. Purpose, connection, love." He kissed her softly. "If I lost every dollar tomorrow, if the company crashed and I was left with nothing, I would still love you. I would still choose you. And I would hope you would still choose me." "I would," Elena whispered, "always." They worked through it, learning to communicate better, to ask for what they needed, to accept help without feeling diminished. Marco started volunteering at the hospital once a week, reading to children in the cancer ward. Elena started attending some of his business functions, learning to navigate his world without losing herself. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, still moments of friction, but they kept choosing each other. 8 months into their relationship, Elena came home from a particularly brutal shift to find Marco in her tiny apartment kitchen, cooking. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. He usually waited for her at his place. "I learned to make your grandmother's recipe," Marco said, gesturing to the pot of caldo de pollo simmering on the stove. "Maya gave me the recipe and walked me through it over video call. I probably butchered it, but I wanted." His voice broke slightly. "I wanted to take care of you the way you always take care of everyone else." Elena started crying, overwhelmed by the gesture. This man, who could have anything catered, who had a private chef on call, had spent hours in her cramped kitchen making soup from scratch because he knew it would mean something. "I love you," she said, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "I love you so much." They ate the soup, which was actually pretty good, and then made love slowly, tenderly, on her tiny bed that was a fraction of the size of his massive mattress, but somehow felt more intimate. Afterward, wrapped in her grandmother's quilt, Marco said, "Move in with me." Elena, "Your space, my space, our space. A real home, not a hotel suite or a cramped apartment, a place we build together." "You bought a house without telling me?" Elena asked, not sure if she was angry or touched. "I bought a possibility," Marco corrected. "If you don't want it, I'll sell it. But I wanted to show you that I'm serious about building a life that works for both of us. Not my old life with you squeezed into it, but a new life we create together." Elena thought about it, about how much time they wasted traveling between his place and hers, about how nice it would be to wake up together every morning, not just on weekends, about building something together. "Can I see it first?" she asked. "Of course." The next day, Marco took her to a beautiful brownstone in Park Slope. It needed work, but it had good bones, a garden, and a warmth that his sterile penthouse lacked. "I thought the top floor could be your space," Marco said as they walked through. "A reading nook, a space for your poetry. The garden needs complete redoing, but I thought we could plant herbs, maybe a small vegetable garden. And this room," he opened a door to a sun-drenched space. "I thought maybe one day it could be a nursery." Elena's breath caught at the vulnerability in his voice. The hope and fear mingled in equal measure. "You really think about that? About us having children?" "All the time," Marco admitted. "I imagine a little girl with your eyes, a boy with your compassion, teaching them to be kind, to be strong, to build lives of meaning rather than just success." He turned to face her. "But only if that's what you want. Only when you're ready. I'm in no rush. I just wanted you to know that when I think about my future, that's what I see. You, me, a family we build together, a home full of love and laughter, like your grandmother's house." Elena walked to the window, looking out at the tree-lined street. She imagined morning coffee in the garden, lazy Sunday mornings, coming home after night shifts to Marco waiting. She imagined children playing in the backyard, family dinners around a table they picked out together, building a life that was truly theirs. "Okay," she said, turning to him with a smile. "Let's do it." They moved in 3 months later, after renovations that Elena insisted on being part of. She learned how to pick paint colors, how to haggle with contractors, how to envision what a space could become. Marco learned to compromise, to ask her opinion, to build something together rather than simply directing. The night they spent their first night in the brownstone, surrounded by unpacked boxes and furniture still in the wrong places, they ordered pizza and sat on the floor of their living room, toasting with cheap wine because the expensive bottles were still packed somewhere. "This feels real," Elena said, looking around. "Like we're really building a life." "We are," Marco said, pulling her close. "Every day. One decision, one compromise, one moment at a time." A year into their relationship, on the anniversary of the night they met, Marco took Elena back to that same charity gala. This time she wore a designer dress he'd insisted on buying her, though she'd made him donate an equal amount to the children's hospital. This time, she walked through those doors on his arm, belonging there because she belonged with him. "Nervous?" Marco asked as they entered the ballroom. "Terrified," Elena admitted. "But I have you, so I'll be okay." They made it through cocktail hour, through dinner, through the speeches and the networking. And then, during the dessert course, Marco stood up. "What are you doing?" Elena hissed. "Something I should have done months ago," Marco said. He walked to the stage, took the microphone, and the room gradually fell silent. "Good evening," he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "For those who don't know me, I'm Marco Valentini. But tonight, I'm not here as a CEO, or a donor, or a business contact. Tonight, I'm here as a man who wants to tell you about the most important night of his life." Elena's face went pale. Exactly 1 year ago, in this very room, a woman spilled champagne on my shirt. Most of you probably remember the incident. Some of you probably thought it was amusing, watching the usually composed Marco Valentini get doused with champagne. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. But what you didn't see was what happened after. You didn't see how this woman, a pediatric nurse who had come here with the sole purpose of advocating for sick children, apologized with such genuine distress that it made me realize I'd forgotten what sincerity looked like. You didn't see how we talked for hours about what really matters in life. You didn't see how she challenged me, inspired me, and ultimately changed me. Marco's eyes found Elena in the crowd. "Elena Santos, will you come up here, please?" Elena shook her head, but the people around her were already smiling, already encouraging her. With trembling legs, she made her way to the stage. Marco took her hand as she reached him. "A year ago, I was a man who had everything. and nothing. I had built an empire, but I'd forgotten why. I was successful by every measure except the only one that actually matters. I was alone. His voice grew thick with emotion. And then, you came into my life, like a storm, and suddenly, everything made sense. You taught me that real wealth isn't measured in dollars but in moments, in Sunday dinners with family, in reading to children in hospital beds, in choosing to stay when things get hard. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. The room went completely silent. I know I said I wouldn't ask until you were ready. But Elena, you make me brave. You make me want to be the man you see when you look at me. You make me believe in things I thought I'd lost the capacity to believe in, like love, like family, like home. Marco dropped to one knee, and Elena's hands flew to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. Elena Santos, you are my home. You are my family. You are every good thing I never knew I was searching for. I love you more than I have words to express, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much. Will you marry me? The room held its breath. Elena looked down at this powerful man on his knees before her, vulnerability written across his face, and she thought about the journey they'd taken. From that rainy night to this moment, through arguments and compromises, through learning and growing and choosing each other every single day. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Marco slid the ring onto her finger, a beautiful solitaire that caught the light and transformed it into rainbows. And then he stood and kissed her as the ballroom erupted in applause. When they finally broke apart, both crying and laughing, Marco rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered. I love you too, Elena replied. Now can we please get out of here? This is very overwhelming. Marco laughed and led her off the stage, through the crowd of well-wishers, and out into the night. They ended up back at the cafe in Soho, the same place they'd first really talked. It was late, nearly closing time, but the owner recognized Marco and waved them in. They sat at the same table by the window, holding hands, the ring catching the light. This is where it really started, Elena said softly. Not the gala, here. When we stopped being strangers and started being us. Best spilled champagne of my life, Marco said. Best disaster I ever created, Elena agreed.